So it's my pleasure to welcome Brian and Jamie. They both raise 4 kids near Frankfort, South Dakota. They have a diversified farming operation. They raise corn and soybeans and several small grains, rye, barley, wheat, and they also have some alfalfa and a cow-calf operation. They're able to graze their cover crops and rotationally graze their grasslands as well. Brian's been on our coalition board since 2020. So for the last 5 years, he's poured a lot into this organization. They are always willing to open up their operation to show people what they're up to and help others in their soil health journey. So if you guys want to take it away.
Okay, we'll just kind of get going here so we don't get behind later. Like Austin said, we're Brian and Jamie Johnson. We've got 4 kids. We're from Frankfort, South Dakota, and we raise corn, beans, wheat, barley, oats for forage, alfalfa. We've got cow-calf operation, and we've got 4 kids that keep us on our toes every day. You guys are in for a treat here. It's been about 2 years since she actually spoke with me, which means she's got 2 years of ammunition of what I've done wrong, in addition to the previous 18 years. So prepare yourselves. Hopefully I'm walking when we get done here.
Growth is a pursuit of personal growth.
Yeah, there you go.
Trying to help your personal growth.
That's right.
Yes, yeah. So what does success in production ag look like today? I think everybody's operation is a little different, and how we each define success can be different. Is it easy rotations that allow for free time? Maximizing profitability, but mining your soil? Is it conforming to the standards of the coffee shop experts? I think we're all at times wondering, what do people think of us? What does the coffee shop think? And obviously those are people who are the experts or not. Or does success look like maximizing every drop of moisture that you get? Is it protecting the health and viability of your soil for the next generation? And is it a profitable, diverse rotation that includes livestock and acres that are not in crop production? Now, any or all of these could apply. And obviously every operation is a work in progress, and we strive to do the best we can in our operation. But the goal is always to get better. And so we're going to go through what we've done here over since I came back from school in the last 20 years, and how we've changed our operation, and also what the groundwork that my parents laid, when I was growing up to get us to where we are today. So this was just, almost 3 years ago, and this is what you talk about with wind erosion and how we really should try to do better here. And unfortunately, the wind blows, and when you have soybeans in a rotation, there's not a lot left to hold the soil in place. And so what we've done on our farm is take some steps to prevent this from happening. And you see this throughout the landscape, through South Dakota, North Dakota. It doesn't really matter. But I think it's a reminder of what we should try to improve upon in our farming operation. We cannot allow this to continually be seen every winter. We should strive to keep the soil in place, because that, in the end of the day, is what is giving us the best chance to succeed long term, and we want to pass this soil on to our next generation. And by allowing it to blow away, you're losing money, and you're not doing yourself any favors. So we talked about the variety of crops we grow. My dad started no-till back in 1986, so we've been at it for a while. And we switched to 20-inch rows, I want to say late 90s, 2000. And so that changed our management practices, because all of a sudden, going from 30s to 20, we knew we had to deal with the residue differently. But what it allowed us to do was be more efficient with the sunlight and the water that we were trying to preserve when we were growing soybeans, because obviously we had a much greater chance to canopy sooner. And what's resulted is a lot more residue on the soil that insulates our soil, but it's also given us an opportunity to come back and graze cattle on our corn acres, as well as introduce some cover crops behind our small grains. And Jamie has been instrumental in pushing us to do more cover crops and grazing on the crop land, because back in probably the early 90s, my dad had a train wreck grazing cattle on some corn stalks. It rained in late fall, it got wet, and it turned it into a mess. And so then he pulled the plug and didn't want to do it for quite a long time. Well, finally, through her persistence of gentle nudges, she convinced me to, we should try it again. And so we made a compromise that we would only graze when the ground was hard, and we started out with, we'll graze in the winter when the ground is frozen. And so that was the first step in a compromise between me and my dad to get us cattle back on the cropland. And since then, we have seen the benefits of doing that, and now we're grazing cover crops in the fall, but we are just conscious of the fact that if we get moisture, we have to go out and remove those cattle from those crop fields if it's going to make a mess, because at the end of the day, we don't want to take a tillage tool across our field. So it's having a plan B in place to open the gate, get the cows in on some sod quick for a while, and that keeps everybody happy.
So backstory, where I come from on the cattle, I grew up in Nebraska, northeast Nebraska, on an Angus ranch, and so I was not particular to the crop side of a farming operation, but more on the cattle side, and we just grew up grazing corn stalks all the time. Of course, we didn't do the soil health stuff and the cover crops and that kind of stuff, but I was just looking at it as a feed standpoint of you're wasting something out there, and then you're hauling manure. Like, stop moving implements, start saving gas, and let your cattle be your implement. So that's where my perspective came from, and our goal right now is always, if we can hit Christmas, that's our best case scenario, and in some years we get to March if we have an open winter, if we don't have very much snow. So right now cows are on stocks, and Brian likes to butter them up and feed them every couple days to keep them happy.
When it's cold.
When it's cold, and it's been cold, holy cow, jeez. But anyways, so that's my backstory on the cattle, where I was coming from with that. So the next thing that we started looking at was just like an acre by acre, even smaller than an acre mentality of looking at your entire operation and where do you have acres. You all have yield maps, right? Yes, you all have yield maps. You all have so much information in front of you. You just need to analyze it and look at it. And so what we started doing was looking at all of those little pieces that were like in the red. Okay, you're losing money. Even if you just stop what you're doing, you're going to make money, right? You're not putting your inputs into it. All those costs just go away and you just be zero. Just stop what you're doing and you'd quit losing money. So we started looking at all those little pieces of ground and started managing on an acre by acre level and looking what would work in that little piece of soil better than what we're doing right now. Is it something for forage? Is it something for grazing? Is it just something for wildlife? Who has salinity problems where you live? Yeah, I see some hands. We planted a lot of pieces, little tiny pieces, back into CRP, back into native grasses. Now it's not a red, right? So there's programs out there to help you do that stuff. So that's where we started to just really hone in on all of those little pieces. So you can see on that oats picture that was raised not for seed but for forage. And then this is in our calving pasture next to a cornfield that for a while we were planting our calving pasture into cover crops just to get it covered in the summer. And then we would graze when we were breeding our heifers back and AIing in that cycle. We would run them out there for 2 weeks and then we'd move them back to pasture. So just to keep the soil covered, have vegetation out there. So that's just a couple of examples. And there's your salinity example.
So about 2009 or 10, we enlisted about over 80 acres of our farm in 8 different tracts into CRP acres. And the reasoning was we were starting to see some salinity issues. We're in the James River Valley, so anybody part of that world, it happens. And you have to manage it, and I think part of it was our crop rotation where we got so wet in the 90s and early 2000s that we had to make a change. And so instead of continually putting all those inputs on those acres that were producing almost nothing with the salinity issues, we made a switch, enrolled it in some grass programs, and it eliminated a lot of the stress on my end from having to worry about getting those acres planted in the spring because they traditionally stay wet. But it also changed our bottom line because all of a sudden you took those negative return acres off your sheet. And what it allowed us to do was increase our wildlife habitat for the hunters that enjoy hunting pheasants for us in the fall. But also it just changed the makeup of our land. And so when we had the opportunity to re-enroll them, 6 years ago now, we left about half of the tracks in the CRP program, but the other half we actually did not re-enroll them and left them grass so that we can either hay them or graze them on the acres that our cattle are hitting almost every year. And so we're just managing it ourselves. We forego the contract payment, but it allowed us to essentially clip those grass areas at least once every 2 years. And it gave us a little more flexibility about where we were grazing our cattle. And so it's been a great change in our operation. Took out those, what I call my high stress acres. They're no longer there. I don't have to worry about them. And they're gonna stay grass probably for as long as I'm farming. Yes?
Are those acres close to your crop field? So does that also allow you, when you get wet, to have a place to move the cattle off of the crop acres that's like relatively close? Because I get a lot of pushback from producers for this compaction issue when it comes to that because they don't have a location that's close if we get the moisture to be able to pull them off. So is that a way that you're able to utilize this or not really?
So in this case with these tracks that we have that are still grass, we just put electric fence around the entire crop field. So most of our CRP and grass acres here are edges of fields. They're right along the edge of the crop field, and essentially it lined up with our guidance lines. And we went out as far as past the salinity issues, and that's where we planted the grass. And as far as moving the cattle off those acres, most of our grazing acres, we have sod pastures and summer paddocks where the cattle are at. So if we are grazing cover crops or corn stalks on these crop fields, we have gates near our water tanks that were put in with an EQIP program where we'll just move them back to sod for a few days
So your pastures are close
Yep.
enough?
Yep, they're all in
Yep.
basically the same section of land. And so it gives us some flexibility. And a lot of that just comes of sitting down and figuring out if you're gonna, in our case, when we did the water tanks, can we strategically place them where we have access to them, multiple grass paddocks, but also crop fields? Because then that opens a whole new window of opportunity for you to grazing your livestock.
So this is an example of one of those pieces that we planted back. So this is, you can see the gravel road here that goes straight down to our farm. And that was just a struggle spot that is wet. It's a natural waterway. There's a culvert. You can kind of see where it's mowed in that ditch right there. That there's a culvert right there, and that this piece of grass like winds through this cornfield. So we just got rid of the problem. We just planted it back to grass. We don't have to worry about planting it. And the water's so much cleaner when it's flowing through there. We've stopped erosion. You have habitat for all the lovely wildlife that, takes out bumpers, but, teenagers.
How we started this program.
Okay, so we started doing rye how many years ago?
9-ish.
It's been that long already.
Yeah, we're old.
Okay. So people ask us all the time, how do you get started? Where do you even start? And I always say start on your smallest, lowest risk piece of ground that you can screw up. And in our case, it was my garden. So we have 4 kids, as previously mentioned. There is a huge garden. I do not have time to weed. There's like all that creepy stuff, you know, that like vines up on stuff. We called it creepin' Jenny in Nebraska. I don't bindweed or whatever it's called here. And I was just sick of trying to weed this garden. And I don't know where I got the idea. Bex or Dennis Clemens or somebody. And I just like, I'm just going to try rye. Like, I don't have time for this. This is terrible. So I just hand casted rye seed out in this. It used to be a pumpkin patch when Brian's parents lived at the farm, and I don't have time to manage a pumpkin patch. So I planted it rye. And lo and behold, there was no weeds. I mean, there was rye and there was no weeds. And where I ran out of seed, just hand broadcasting like this, there was a line of weeds and no weeds. Like, and I remember taking him by the arm down to the garden that he never visits or helps weed and said, look at this. Maybe you should do this in your fields. And then you don't have to use chemicals. And lo and behold, he tried it on the very smallest field right next to our farm that we could graze if something went terribly wrong. And now 9 years later, we spread rye on everything. So, even if it's your garden, smallest, lowest cost, least risk field or whatever, use a planter box if you need to. That's how you get started.
So the first few years we did it, I tried it on a 30-acre field, and I think the next year I tried it on a couple more fields. You know, we were up to about 100 acres there, and I was basically learning as we go because hadn't seen much of it done in our part of the world. And I saw the results in the garden, and it was like, okay, this is great for weed control. It's great to prevent erosion. What can it do in my crop fields that doesn't impact our cash crops? And so it's been basically a science experiment as we've gone on here. And we've learned a lot and a lot of unexpected results that have kind of changed our outlook on farming, on our operation, and the profitability, which helps pay for 4 kids going to school. So we first started, the first year we did it, I flew on 2 bushels of rye and ended up getting a rain. And we usually seed this the end of August. It coincides every year, it seems like, with Soil Health School. And so usually between like the 20th and 30th of August, we'll end up flying rye on. And we've honed in on the last few years about 90 to 100 pounds an acre. And I know that's high compared to what a lot of people recommend or think we should use, but I've seen the results on the back end to make me think that I don't want to back off too much here, because it's only costing me for 100 pounds plus the aerial application about $28.50 an acre. So it's a fairly low investment. And the reason that I fly it on in August is so that if we get a rain, it gets started before November. Now, obviously, this year was not the perfect scenario because it was so dry for everybody. But I don't want to wait until after corn harvest and then drill it in for 2 reasons. 1, I want the early start. And 2, I don't want to drill going through my corn stalks and chopping up all that residue so that it may move. So I settled it on the aerial application, and I'm very happy how it's worked. And like we said, it's great for weed control and great for water infiltration. I think if everybody remembers Keith's slide about the ability of water to be absorbed in the soil for every point of organic matter, we've seen that on our farm as well. You know, all you have to do is drive down the road after a rain event and see how much water is ponding on your field. And then find somebody that maybe has different management practices and is the water ponding on theirs. And you can do a comparison, because in our situation, we've been no-till for so long and been doing this for so long that I don't have a conventionally tilled field on our farm. So we just go by, well, what do you see? How are you comparing yourself to, to the neighbors and how the water is soaking in? And there was one of the first big years we did this, I want to say it was 19 or 20, We had like 8 inches in the fall in October. And we'd airplaned on this rye on almost every field. And there'll be a picture in here coming up, I think. Yeah, this is October 21. We had 8 inches of rain that fall, and that was what our fields looked like at harvest. Obviously not expected, but I was thrilled with it because it seemed like every seed took, and it was just a carpet.
The earlier you get it applied, the better. The more biomass you're going to get in the fall, and the more biomass you get in the fall equals more biomass in the spring.
Question?
Yeah, two questions. First of all, what's your herbicide program? And you're in 20-inch rows, I'm in 22s. Are you having the sunlight getting in there that can get that started? Because when you get a high population in 22-inch or 20-inch rows, you got a lot of shading.
So our corn population, we're variable rate corn and beans, but the average corn is going to be 35,000. Okay, and so the sunlight really isn't an issue. It's more of a does it get a rain to get started, and then it'll hang on until after harvest and it gets more sunlight. What was the other question?
Herbicide.
Herbicide. So I haven't seen any issues with our herbicide program, and I'm putting on some atrazine in the spring along with a pre. I think with the fact that if we get we get 20 some inches of rain a year where we're at, a normal rain year, that the chemicals are not holding back our rye when they're germinating there end of August and September. So you have to manage that. Obviously you have to be aware of the lifespan that you're putting on with your chemicals, but knowing in our situation with the thick corn populations, you're also helping shade out some of those weeds, so maybe you can back off some of the chemicals that you're using because the weeds are not going to be access to the sunlight near as often compared to, say, 30 or 40-inch corn. But the rye really, we haven't had an issue with it.
So the rye does okay with the shading?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to bother it at all.
Are you taking the rye to grain, or is that just for cover crop?
So I haven't taken it to grain. It's an option in my back pocket.
What do you see for growth the fall and spring?
Well, that is the next spring. Okay? Now, the first year...
Yes, we're talked about. We are talked about at the coffee shop, I'm sure.
So the first year where we went really gung-ho on this, my dad was nervous because the reason he switched in '86 was to conserve moisture. And then you show up and you have this in the spring and he's thinking, what did I let him do? But as it turns out, most of the time in the spring, we tend to have excess moisture. It's just the nature of the beast, especially when you're planting soybeans. And so we have not had to terminate early yet, but that's always an option as well. We actually wait to terminate until about a week after planting.
Explain what terminating early is.
Killing the rye. Now, the timing for us is usually the rye is not tall enough in the right stage where we could crimp it, so we end up using Roundup to kill it off when we make our herbicide pass. And so it's not an extra pass. It's not costing us extra to do it. And so it fits right in with our program, but it also works really well, and it allows the rye to get to various stages of growth.
But terminating early stops it from using up your moisture that's needed for the next.
Correct. So let's say you were really dry, which could happen this spring, and you were concerned about leaving some moisture in the ground. You could actually go in April or however soon you feel like it and kill it off if that is a concern of yours. We've never done that before, and actually we've found that in those wet springs, if you leave the rye growing, that top, maybe quarter inch or so is dark because the rye is shading it. But once you get down to where you're placing the seed, it is just a fantastic seed bed. And so it's what was going to be some heartburn for my dad turned up being really a big change in our operation and a success that we've had, and a lot of unexpected successes. And we've continued to do it now every year. Every single acre of corn gets rye flown on it. So this is an example of about a month after termination, let's say here, and you can see the rows of soybeans. And we plant our beans right in between the corn from last year. and there's all that rye. And so it's really a protection for those soybeans, because I think if everybody remembers, usually we get a wind event in the spring as well.
Yep.
And you'll hear about it probably more so west, Hand and Hyde County out there, they get it really bad west of Miller. But you hear about soybeans getting clipped off by these dust storms. This is what our fields look like in those situations. And so nothing's moving. So it actually protects the small beans from those wind events while also providing great weed control.
So are you able to cut down on any weed control passes? Like, do you still have to do a post, or do you ever get away with not doing it?
I'm still doing a post in about the second week of July.
Okay.
But we're down to basically a small rate of Roundup and Liberty. And we're seeing a lot less weed escapes in our field. Our fields are really clean. And we're backing off on the amount of products I put out in the middle of May on that first pass. My goal is to get it as far away from the chemical over time as we can. Obviously, every year is a little different, and it's a moving target. Yes?
Couple of questions. Are you putting trees out post-planting, pre-emerge when you're desiccating that or killing that?
Yes.
So you got to make sure that you're out there before soybeans.
Yes.
Second question, have you pushed back your soybean planting then as a result of incorporating rye?
It gives me options if I want to. Now, I don't intentionally push it back. Usually we don't start planting beans until about the 13th of May is kind of the earliest we go. And we've planted as late as this year. We were out there on June 9th. Now, a couple years ago, we had I think it was 19 or 20, and I had rye in a field, and it was really wet that spring. And we let the rye keep growing, and it was, I think, May 31st. We went out there, and I cut probably 80% of that field with the Moco and ended up haying that rye. 3 days after I cut it, we had it baled off, and I went in the next day with the planter and planted beans into it. Because all that field needed, I wanted to use as much moisture as possible that spring because it was too wet to go in there. But as soon as the sunlight was able to get through onto the ground, it helped dry off that top half-inch of soil, and we were able to get beans in there, and it was the best bean crop we'd raised on that field. Next year we planted oats in there, and now we have an alfalfa orchard grass mix out there. So the rye gives me flexibility because we have cows, that if I need to graze it or hay it, I can call an audible instead of forcing myself into the bean corner on every field. Yes?
Now, we had a few years ago, I just had a light, I think 30 pounds an acre rye, but we had a real wet spring. That's why I like to leave it until I plant. I was planting in rye that was taller than you.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience doing it the first few times. But it really, that ground is firm underneath there with that growing rye.
So bad, it was wrapping on my closing wheels. I just took the closing wheels off. I've got wheel type seed firmers instead of Keaton's, but I planted in there and I quit, combined the rest. I wished I'd kept on planting beans.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you're doing that, and once you clip it off for hay, when you go in to do your burn and freeze, that.
In that situation, there wasn't much left. But that was a 40-acre field that I needed. I knew I was going to end up needing some forage, and so I was okay with haying it. It's not, we haven't done it since then.
Were you able to put down your burns and freeze though, and were they affected, or did the rye escape?
It was mostly effective. There was a few more escapes in that field, which I was able to get in my post-pass early July. So it wasn't an issue. This is just this past year. Was there a question? Yes.
Yes. So you put your rye on this past fall.
Mm-hmm.
It was so dry, did it germinate?
So I'm not sure if it did or not. So in August 24th, we flew on probably 2/3 of our acres of rye, and then the airplane didn't come back until the next week. We got an inch of rain on the 25th. So the day after we spread most of those acres, it rained an inch. That all came up. And it happens to be, we've got a quarter north of our farm there that we ended up cutting 70 acres of silage on because of the hailstorm this year. And you can see right to the line where he spread the rye on the 24th and where he came back the next week. So this coming spring is going to be probably the first time we'll ever see whether there's a huge difference of what germinated and then what we didn't see germinate this past fall, because it didn't rain until basically November for us after that August 25th rain. So it's going to be a learning opportunity for us this year.
Yeah, sounds like that's going to be a test plot that maybe we can weigh this next year.
It's possible.
If the rye doesn't come up,
Yeah.
I would be interested in seeing the yield difference there.
Yeah, it's going to be a learning opportunity. You know, and every year is different. And you know, how many years are we into this, and we're still figuring things out.
So Brian, have you ever tried to be brave, put Roundup on your rye, but no pre's? Have you ever tried to experiment? I got a neighbor that tells me to do it. I haven't stuck my neck out yet.
I haven't done it yet.
You do it first and we'll.
And I've got a couple fields this spring that are small enough that if there's enough rye there this spring and I'm happy with it, I'm probably going to do it, because I've been waiting for the right opportunity to pull the trigger on a small scale, just like when we started seeding. See, I did learn something. But it's on the wish list.
I live by a major highway. I'm in a fishbowl. Everybody knows.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, we don't live by a highway, but we live on the county roads, and everybody knows that, you know, we're the crazy ones that try things. So, yep.
Well, as far as that goes, until my son-in-law this year put in a pre, I've been planting rye, killing it, and all I used was Roundup and no pre's. I haven't ever, probably the first year we used a pre in beans.
Okay.
And we've just terminated the rye. I mean, your rye is, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
keeping things down, and
It's got that ileopathic.
and I had a, you were talking
trait
about
to it.
this rye, going in, we had a neighbor who, they cut silage in their field, and he drilled rye in part of the field where they cut silage. They didn't drill anywhere they just combined. He said the corn yielded way better, was way better where the rye cover crop was than where they didn't plant it.
There's more to rye than a guy thinks, and that's where we're learning something every year.
So do I understand right? So you are doing what he just asked. You're doing the rye.
I've done it, yeah, I've done it, yeah. It's,
Yeah.
I'm not a,
I have as well,
And it works?
this past year. I used Roundup, 16 ounces of 5-pound Roundup, 3 pounds AMS, 3.2 ounces surfactant, and Liberty Post was the only thing I sprayed.
And it kept everything
Yep.
down?
I mean, I had a few escapes, but the Liberty came back in, Post and cleaned it up.
Yeah, you're coming back with a post there in early July. You're going to catch your escapes.
That's what we also did. We took our rye off and chopped it.
Okay.
And then planted it like this day later.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't spray it for probably back maybe a week and a half later after the beans were up. I'd say the key that we ran into is your heavy seeding rate. So like we've experimented with like 30, 40 pounds, and we've run into troubles there with more escapes, honestly, and not having the weed suppression. So we started out, our first year was almost 150 bushel, 50 pounds to the acre.
Okay.
And then we came down, then we went to 50 when we went to the plain, and then we're back up to 120. And so I would already make the point of like, to get the weed suppression ability, you need to go with that heavier seeding rate. But we're doing similar programs, which you're doing, not having much issue at all.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what this spring brings, since we had that rain right after a good chunk of our acres got applied, to see if we've got enough where I can do that test this year and see what we end up with.
You trying anything in beans? Like to plant corn into next year?
No, we don't do a cover crop behind beans, just because we're usually not done with beans until second week of October, and I just don't feel like the window's there enough.
You think you could have success flying it on like you do with the corn?
If you get a rain in October, yes. We just haven't done it where we're planting corn into rye, other than where the plain got wide on one field and it drifted into for the next spring, and it was 80 foot wide, and I didn't notice any issues with it, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet. Yes.
current growing season just isn't really long enough to make that kind of scenario work coming in after beans. So I'm with the agents, the NRCS, and our state agronomist would not be happy with that situation. Because the growing season just isn't there to get the germination and the growth, to get enough organic matter created to really pay for itself.
Why couldn't you do it at the same time and do it in August?
Yeah, like, why don't you do the beans in August?
My concern would be if you get a wet fall, and this was mid-October and you're still trying to combine beans, and that rye was 6 to 10 inches tall. Yeah. That's the only thing that scares me. Is
you know how easy that cuts?
Well, I haven't tried it yet. Yep.
Yeah, they were talking about planting date. I planted dormancy last year. I planted rye just before Christmas. We planted it in 22-inch rows. We're on 22-inch rows, and I didn't want to knock down as much residue, and I have a machine made that 750 drill openers set at 22 inches.
Yep.
But yeah, we had rye again this spring. It's surprising what that stuff will do. I mean, sure, you want fall growth, but last year we were so dry, I didn't get in any hurry. I didn't want it to put it in dry ground and get a little shower and it sprout and die. So we waited until, like I said, it was starting to snow when he finished up.
My guess is that even the rye that we didn't see germinate in the fall, we had a inch-plus rain mid-November. My guess is that I'm going to see it in the spring.
All you need is that seed to swell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we'll find out how resilient it is.
And rye planted in the spring will act a lot differently too. It'll still emerge. It'll still give you that allelopathic effect, just doesn't grow very tall.
Yeah, it's going to have a different growth stage to it than the stuff that came earlier.
You ever fertilize the rye?
No, and we'll get to some fertility stuff here shortly. So one of the major reasons I was excited with rye early on was because we were having some white mold issues about 6 years ago, and it was a headache. Everybody knows what white mold can do to a bean field, and so we were doing a speech one time, and Dwayne Beck caught me afterwards and said, "Well, you do know there was a research study that they showed that the rye actually throws off the sclerotia." And so since we've been doing this rye, we have not had a white mold outbreak on any of our soybean acres. And so that was one of the big benefits that I saw, and that really pencils out well. Because when you start eliminating that white mold issue from your soybeans, your profits go way up.
But are you spraying for white mold proactively down?
No, we're done. Nope, it's all rye. Yes.
Yeah, what was the white mold situation in the past, like when you did struggle with it?
Anywhere from 5 to 20 bushel an acre hit in multiple areas. And obviously a lot of it can be weather related. You get those humid August where there's no wind. Well, we've had those since we've been doing all the rye, and there's zero issues. Because I've flown my drone up in end of August, early September, and late September just to see if there's any outbreaks, and we haven't had any. So one of the first things that I was concerned with when we were getting our samples back after we started the rye was, one, is this hurting us or is this helping us? And is there a pattern developing? And this was before we were doing every acre. And I was starting to see the samples come back, and everything's zone sampled. And our fertility levels were going up, but I couldn't quite pinpoint why. And I was talking to a friend, a year later, and he was seeing similar things that he had tried. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? Well, 2 years ago, down at the Soil Health Conference in Sioux Falls, Rick Clark put this slide up on the screen, and it showed his results from when he did some sampling of different stages of rye and the types of fertility levels he found, and then he put that back to dollars per acre. And that was like the light bulb went off in my head. I was like, okay, now this makes sense. Because what we've seen on our farm is we used to have to apply P&K fertilizer regularly based on our samples, and we've eliminated that from our program now. And so that goes back where it's costing me $28.50 an acre to apply this rye, but our return is probably 5 times that because of what we are not applying in commercial fertilizer. And this kind of lays out, this is an example of one of the fields. And so the years under here, that is the year that it's going to go to corn. So this field first had rye flown on it in the fall of 19, and that data is not in there because those sample came back, it was a bad sample. So I didn't throw it in there because it throws everything off. But this field has had rye flown on it in the fall of 19, the fall of 21, the fall of 23. And you can see the trend there.
When did you put it on?
So anything here that would have been over 16 has not had any phosphorus applied. That's my cutoff. We're not applying maintenance or nothing. And so there were some zones that immediately hit those numbers, but then as soon as within a year or two of flying the rye on, all of a sudden everything kept jumping. And this is a good representation of almost all of our fields across our farm. And so it's a drastic change in what I was taught for years in college and my first 10 years of farming before we were doing cover crops of you have to apply fertilizer, at least a maintenance level, to produce a crop. Well, here with this rye, we've seen our fertility go through the roof, and now we're making drastic savings per acre.
You doing any Haney testing?
On a few fields, yes. And so I've only done that now for the past 3 years, so we're still figuring out how that actually, it's a learning curve for me there. Because I've been doing this stuff for over 20 years.
Yeah, that's easy. You know how to work those.
Yes.
Have you been doing this for your own information gathering? This field apparently is just a corn bean rotation.
This field has, the only time this field had wheat on it was back in probably 03 or 04. It's been corn and beans since then. So we try to get small grains on about a third of our acres every year, but majority of our acres are a corn bean rotation, and that's where I think the rye cover crop comes in, because it gives us that diversity in that. Dwayne Beck doesn't call it a rotation, but in that situation it allows us to get a cover crop on those acres, and we've seen great results from it. Yes.
So are you not applying any supplemental fertilizers to that field now?
The only fertilizer that these fields are getting, and this will go for every acre that's going to either wheat or corn, it's purely nitrogen and AMS. There's no P and K applied anywhere.
Can you quickly say, what do the colors mean?
The colors are the different zones in that field. So this field has 6 zones in it.
Okay.
So each of those colors is a zone in that particular field. So we're about running out of time here, so we're going to run through this, and you can read this to yourself as well. But when we first started, it was basically, can this rye cover crop provide weed control and help us with erosion? And the answer is yes. But what we've seen on top of that is some amazing dollar savings for our operation as well. And if I was a guy in eastern South Dakota that was not growing small grains and I was growing corn and beans, I would strongly consider a rye cover crop to help with your erosion, but also to help with your white mold, and maybe you would potentially see some fertility results similar to ours. And now it's not a guarantee because we've been in no-till for so long. Our biology is working great for us. If you remember Keith's slide, we're charging the battery. Our battery is charged, and that's not something you can do in 1 year. But for us, it's been a great asset, and it's allowed us to make a lot of savings on our fields. Yes?
Have you seen your organic matter levels rise?
Our organic matters are rising too, and our average is probably low to mid 4s now, and they were probably low to mid 3s about 15 years ago.
You've no-tilling all your crops, corn, soybeans, small grain?
Yep.
Everything.
Yep.
And you said you've been doing that since '87?
Dad started in, I think it was 86 or 87. Dwayne Beck was at the Redfield Research Farm, which is about 7 miles away from our farm. And Dad went and talked to him because he was sick of cultivating the corn multiple times a year and then watching it burn up what he didn't kill with a cultivator. And so he knew he had to do something different. And so that was the big change. And it's partly why I'm back farming today, is because he made some big adjustments back then. A lot of trial and error with learning how to get the machinery set right back in the day. You know, I think it's a lot easier to share information nowadays on what works and what doesn't. And so we're at the stage now, we're just trying not to screw it up and make small incremental changes.
On your previous slide there, so are you just grazing your rye, just looking at your benefits there, are you just grazing rye in stalks in the winter months, or are you grazing it all in spring months?
It's during the winter.
But it's available in the spring if we get in a pinch with calving, and just say it's a bad spring and there's no moisture and our calving pasture is pretty rough. Then we've got the option to shift things, because like you said, everything's connected. The water tanks are all positioned correctly.
We can push them there.
Yeah.
If our pastures aren't ready for whatever reason, you got a cold spell and the grass hasn't grown up.
Well, the reason I was asking that question is, like, I'm originally from Nebraska as well. My folks are still there, and what their guys are now paying for corn stalk grazing alone, and what they're going to in calving. And I'm in Minnesota looking at that dollar amount. I mean, $2.25 to $2.50 a day on grazing corn stalk, and if you got your rye there, the feed and forage value
goes up.
It's just humongous right now. So I was just curious that was getting utilized.
We'll kind of zip through this slide. Moral of this story here is look at cover crops as not only a short-term investment, but a long-term investment, and you're going to see gains on both ends. It takes time. There's going to be times where things don't work. There's going to be a failure of some fashion, but it's a learning opportunity. Okay? Every year is different. Mother Nature dictates how stuff works a lot of times, but if you have a management strategy where you've got a couple options of, if this happens, I'm going to do this, and if this happens, I'm going to do this, you can make your way through it and make things work over time.
I think most importantly is just having that growth mindset of just continual learning, and like Brian said, to having those options to move efficiently between A, B, and C, and D sometimes, and not getting upset if A doesn't work. Okay, we've got a B. Don't stress about it, right? Like, just have that growth mindset of wanting to learn and to continually just trying things. And if you screw up, you screw up. We've screwed up. Our first year planting cover crops, it was a mess. It was terrible. I'm like, what is that? It was not pretty.
Yep.
But we learned. It was our herbicides. And then the next year we changed. So we learned. As long as you learn from it, it's not a failure.
We've talked about some of this already. Due to time, we're going to smoke through this pretty quick. This is one of the cover crops in 19. This was in the calving pasture, so that was planted probably mid-May.
That's a four-wheeler in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's a four-wheeler hiding it. Now, obviously, the rain does wonderful things, but that just to show you what can happen if you take a chance and try something, because you don't know unless you try. We try and get the kids involved as much as they can. She is now 18 years old and had a strong case of senioritis and wants to go to college. But yeah, they're out there helping us and learning. She actually did a couple science fairs on soil your undies throughout the farm. So, and all the kids always, have questions and make you think about things a little differently. And that's one of the benefits of her being an import from Nebraska. She saw things on our farm through a different lens than I did. And so she asks me questions that make me think about things a little differently. Cattle grazing on cover crops, we did that, still do it. Targeted initially, our lower productivity acres, and now that was after the barley hay crop, and so we could get in there, plant the cover crops in the fall, and they grazed them during the winter. And this is rye. You can kind of see the green color in the stalks there. This was a couple years ago. It just shows that cattle grazing on stalks with rye, they really love it. Our mineral and protein tub consumption has gone way down when they're grazing stalks with rye. A couple years ago we had them on a quarter of corn stalks, and there was a quarter of cover crop behind wheat. So it was a mix of sorghum, sudan, radish, millet, turnip, and we went through 100 pounds of mineral for 100 head of cows in 4 months. It was just amazing. I couldn't believe it. I kept, checking up there every week, and it was like, they're walking right by it on the way to the water tank. They were perfectly happy. They were getting all their nutrient needs out of the field. So, how do you know if you're succeeding? Everybody's situation is different, but a lot of it has to do with, are you more profitable? Is your stress lower? And is the wife happier? Yeah, number one. So, any more questions before we got to move on? Yes.
Planting green, have you ever used your air seeder to plant into that rye?
No.
Have you ever added more species when you fly on the rye?
Not with the rye, because the airplane that we use, they kind of like the same seed size. Now, I know there's some mixes that have the rye and the radish and turnip in there. I should probably try it and see what happens. But the airplane people can get kind of finicky
I
with
work with
things.
a pilot, and it is almost impossible to keep small seeds in mix with it. Like, even just putting it through the conveyor, it all ends up at the bottom.
Yeah.
So it's just very difficult.
The 100
You
pounds
do
of
it,
rye,
but you're not necessarily getting
the 100-pound of rye has just kind of been our sweet spot. So, yep.
You still continue to practice supplying rye on corn if you didn't have livestock?
Yes. The livestock, I mean, we're obviously seeing major benefits of that, but I would fly the rye on every acre of corn stalk regardless if I had cattle or not.
Well, it's like the guy in the main session's talking, it's what those roots are doing to your
Yep.
soil.
Exactly.
It's holding everything in place all winter long, so it's not blowing around. Yep.
When you're grazing in the fall, you try to factor in the growth stage of the rye, not damaging the rye stand at all, or you just?
No. Typically, we don't turn our cows out on stalks until about Thanksgiving. And so the rye, it's pretty much dormant by that point. Yep.
So on your stock grazing, are you just turning out, or are you stripping and doing any grazing damage?
We just turn them out when they're either at our place or my dad's place, which is 3 miles away, because it's either a quarter or a half section. And then we just let them go, and they just wander and find their way around. And if I need to supplement them, I'll go out there with our bale processor and I'll lay down a strip of hay, and I just move over 10 feet every day. But I target where I'm feeding it. I go off based off my soil sample results and the yield map to find those lower nutrient zones that need a little help with manure, and that's where I feed them at. So, yep.
2 questions. On your corn, are you doing a 2-pass or a 1-pass?
1 pass.
1-pass. Second question, when you're grazing the rye, do you limit the amount of time that they can be out there so that you still have some growth for next year, or you just turn them out all winter?
We've had them out there till March 8th, so they've been out there all winter before, and it doesn't the rye may be a little slower in the spring, but I don't care, because we've saved $10,000 a month by not having to feed them when we graze. So if anybody has any more questions, come up and see us afterwards. The sessions, we got to get moving, get switched back to the main session back there. All right, thanks for coming, everybody.